November 27th through December 28th, 1908, of a Journal from Japan by Marie Carmichael Stopes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. November 27th. After the morning's work, I went to the Goten for the faculty lunch. Professor T took me from there to see the anthropological department of the university. They have a very considerable space and lots of specimens of all kinds, though I did not see many European ones. The stone implements naturally interested me most. There are extraordinary numbers of arrowheads and a good many celts of rough polished stone. It appears that there are no paleoliths in the country. It is certainly true that none have been found, but that does not satisfy me that Paleolithic man did not live in Japan. Shell mounds of late Neolithic age seem to be the chief fundorts for the tools. In many cases earthenware, beads, and such like are found with them. The arrowheads are made of flint, rather more opaque and with a duller patina than English flint. But many of them are of obsidian, some of which are beautifully clear. There are also agate and chert ones, and one perfect gem of pure quartz. Their shapes are much like those common in Scotland, but a few were a little unusual, with particularly fine edges, and some were very minute. The arrowheads rather preponderated, but I was more struck by the scrapers, which were particularly beautiful, and of a type I have not discovered anywhere before. There were many variations among the scrapers, the top edge being beautifully chipped. It was evident that a thong had kept them in a handle. Of the type composed of a straight single flake, so common at home, I saw very few. Professor T has made the best arrangement for keeping the specimens I have ever seen. Small tin boxes with glass tops, and fastened by a tight ring clasp. The specimens, placed on cotton wool in it, are immovable when the lid is shut, and the boxes can be placed in any position. But directly they are open, they are free and can be handled, unlike those sewn onto the irritating museum cards. December 5th. At the Institute all day. I don't at all approve of this Saturday work, but am too busy to feel justified in taking a single day off, as I can only work in the Institute. Even writing for this work I can't do at home, because I need the specimens and books at my hand. December 6th. Lovely brilliant sunshine, but a heavy wind, so I am spending the day lying on a futon on the engawa, open veranda all along the house, in perfect shelter. For the triangular shape of the house keeps off all the wind and cuts off none of the sun, and I am lying in a pink cotton kimono with my hair down, and can fancy myself on an August beach. But I know directly the sun goes in, Jack Frost will pop out, and in my thickest padded clothes I shall shiver. The sunshine is everything here. No wonder they put the sun and nothing else on their flag. The sky is more blue than our August heaven, and although dead leaves are whirling, the cryptomerias are green and the maples blood red, while my rose bush has flawless leaves with crimson petioles. Would it were always November in Japan. December 11th. I have been too busy to write all these days, and, as it happened, there has really been nothing worth recording except my discontent with the artisans and tradespeople, which had perhaps better be left untold. Today I lunched at the Goten and met Baron M., last year the Minister of Education. He was very friendly and made conversation in quite a European and un-Japanese style, though I thought him stiff last year. In the evening we had the second dinner of the University of London Union. Viscount I was there, the first Japanese to come to London to study, and a very entertaining brusque old man he is. Count H., recently ambassador to England, took me in, and there were 16 of us altogether, 7 foreigners and 9 Japanese. It was quite a jolly dinner. Count H. proposed the toast the University, and later on Professor S. proposed the toast MCS, which they all stood and drank with banzai, so I have had my health drank by an ambassador and a viscount. But one has to pay for these delights, and the price is heavy, an after dinner return thanks speech. Now I can lecture without feeling quite a fool, and I can speak at debates, but when it comes to after dinner speeches I am done for. I don't know why I remain so stupid over it. This time, in the return thanks speech, I entirely forgot the thanks. After dinner there was some business, and we elected Professor L to the committee. Then various of us told stories or gave recitations, and we had a little laughter. I walked my bicycle back with Professor L to the broad road, and we discussed Dante, Milton, and other great ones on the way. And I am much relieved to find he doesn't approve of the translation of Dante I have been reading. I began to fear I must be a monster, as I couldn't feel the expected respect for Dante. I then mounted my iron steed, which was champing its bit, a habit it has lately, and I can't break it off with any amount of oil, and rode through the silent streets with an undertoned caroling. There's something very exhilarating about a ride under brilliant stars, through silent roads where silhouettes of pine trees cut the sky, after a good dinner and jolly company. December 12th. Went over to Ueno Park to see the Imperial Museum. It is really very fine indeed, a much more extensive and beautiful collection than I had expected, particularly of lacquer, kakemonos, and costumes of old Japan. Their Japanese collections were magnificent. But as I expect they are described by 1,000 other pens, I won't repeat. Suffice it to say that we had planned to go out to lunch at 1, though the usual university time is 12, and when we thought to look at a watch it was 2:30. And we were very cold as well as hungry. There are nice gardens round the museum which lie in the park, and it was a very pleasant morning altogether. December 13th. It has been a brilliant day with glowing sun, and at 1 Mrs. N and the Brownie son of hers came to lunch. The Brownie looked and acted splendidly and was a pleasure, and his eyes twinkled a keen appreciation, rare in men of 4 years old, when, after warning him to be good and not to spell anything, I tipped the pheasant's breadcrumbs into my own lap, and he got through the meal without a mishap of any sort. Almost immediately after lunch we went over to, where do you think, Lafcadio Hearn's house, to see his wife and family. A rare privilege, for the sanctum is unusually well guarded. But Mrs. N's friendship has won me the way in, for as I said, the eldest boy learns English from her, and is devoted to her. The house is some way out of town, in pure Japanese style, with a Japanese name on the lamp, for you will remember Hearn became a Japanese and took a Japanese name, which is written in Chinese characters over his door. Koizumi, we pronounce it. There is a nice garden, visible partly from the entrance, where was the children's swing. As we entered, we passed along an ingawa veranda, bounding a tiny internal square of garden on our way to the reception room. This was in the purest Japanese style, well built with pretty woodwork, a thing one learns to notice in this country. I immediately observed the kakemono, which was exceptionally beautiful, tall peaks of bare rock pillars standing up against a grey sky, where a moon half shone through a band of cloud. A picture that one could never forget, and yet would ever wish to see instead of merely remembering. I remarked on it to Mrs. Hearn, who told me that Lafcadio had very good taste in kakemonos, and always bought only what pleased him exactly. Wise man, when he had the cash. There was also a bronze in the room, the bent stalk of a fading lotus leaf with a collapsed blade of the leaf, and though there sounds no beauty in that, the bronze throbbed with it. Mrs. Hearn was very friendly. Less shy and quiet than most Japanese women, she was yet distinctly Japanese in her shyness and quietness. Without beauty, she pleased. She and the children were all in usual Japanese costume, and the only foreign things in the room were ourselves and the cakes and cups of tea she brought us. I inquired if she liked foreign food, and she told me that she did very much, and that Lafcadio always ate it, for though he liked all the things to be pure Japanese, and would have nothing he could help that was not, Japanese food upset him, and he always had foreign food, but that now she never prepared it. We chatted about many things, and she spoke freely of Hearn, of whom I did not dare at first to ask any questions till she had spoken voluntarily so much, to show that she liked to speak of him. After the tea and cakes we went to Hearn's study, and got a sight of the real Japanese garden at the back of the house. The study was lined with low bookshelves filled with many charming volumes in French and English. There was a very high table made especially for him, for his extremely short sight, and the famous pipe box, with dozens of long, tiny bowled Japanese pipes. The children were with us freely, and also a friend, a Mr. Blank, who was the first student Hearn had in Japan, and who has remained faithful through everything, and now acts as adviser and friend of the family, and lives in part of the house. He was bright and intellectual looking beyond the average, and speaks excellent English. Mrs. Hearn insisted on us staying to a meal, which we could not avoid doing without positive rudeness, though we had only expected afternoon tea. It was a first-class Japanese meal, with nearly all the things I like. Sometimes the things are quite uneatable, as for example the sea cucumbers in a raw salad, which are also first-class things, and I enjoyed it, but I got home at 8 instead of 5 as I expected. The children were with us most of the evening, showing Brownie picture books of which they had a fine stock. Hearn evidently liked Andrew Lang's fairy books, for they were nearly all there. In his study, where we had supper, was the little family shrine, built rather like a miniature temple of plain wood. Within was Hearn's photo, and before it burnt a tiny lamp, and stood dainty vases of small flowers. According to Japanese ideas, the spirit of the departed inhabits this dwelling, and needs the love and attention of his kindred, and takes part in their life. Is Christianity more consoling to the bereaved than this? From the window by the shrine could be seen the grove of the tall bamboo Hearn loved, and in the room floated one or two of the mosquitoes with which he had such sympathy. To see the eldest son, after having read that tender, wonderful letter of Hearn's about his birth, was, I believe, a mistake. Hearn's words had made me love the child, but he isn't a child any longer, and is now a thin, lanky youth, shy of manner, and slow in English speech. But perhaps, for there is promise in his face, I shall like him well as a man in the years to come. How Hearn wove words into an opalescent cobweb! I could imagine him feeling intoxicated with the beauty of words. Nay, he must have been, for as a reader I am intoxicated by words of his, which must have affected him 1,000 times more strongly. December 16th. It has been blowing a perfect hurricane, and is blowing still, so that I panted on my cycle to the university, but enjoyed the ride back, for by a most unusual chance the wind didn't turn and face me on my home way also, as it generally does, but stopped respectfully behind me and blew me gaily at full speed up hills which always make me dismount on usual days. The sky was brilliantly clear, and Mount Fuji shone blue and white in the morning, and purple black in front of a copper and gold sky at night. Wonderful mountain! The only thing in Japan that is not overrated, as someone told me he felt it was. December 20th. Writing all the early part of the day, but went along to tea with the Ds and met Ambassador O. We had a cosy time. In the course of conversation the Ambassador told me to listen, and then said that it was not necessarily the cleverest people who made the most mark in the world, but the people who wrote what they knew, who gave to the world of their knowledge, instead of letting it die with them, as so many of the truly great have done. The D's house is peculiarly charming. It is not, of course, a salon in any sense of the word, but more there than anywhere I know people really converse, and sometimes say things that the autocrat of the breakfast table might pop straight into his book. Though what they actually are I cannot record. The after effect is much the same as reading a chapter of a light, well-written book. And the rooms, too, are so pretty, a charming mixture of Japanese and Western daintiness, like a black-eyed, rosy-cheeked Eurasian, who sparkles with the beauty of both the parent countries. December 21st. I worked hard all day. Professor F is back, and we got quite a lot done. In the evening, I went to some pretty tableaux from Pride and Prejudice, arranged by a number of people I know, and at 10 went into the Opera House, where I met a party of friends. This Opera House merits a word of description. As in the newspaper it said, for the first time we in Tokyo can sit in a foreign theatre, listen to a foreign orchestra, and see a foreign play played by foreigners all at one time. The theatre or opera house, built partly on the Vienna model, was opened only a few days ago. and is now playing Dorothy by amateurs, but many of them have professional talent and training. The white and gilt interior, the brilliant lights without, and the real home effect of the piece were delightful after all these months without the possibility of anything of the sort. To permanent residents here it will be a very great boon, and is already patronized by all the legations and many of the best Japanese. Outside were panting motors, and I discovered that the smell of petrol is delightful in its reminder of home. December 23rd. I learned that last evening the D.'s house was burnt to the ground. That pretty house I liked so much. I am indeed grieved. The danger of the houses, which are all wood, is very great here. I have been in Japan about 18 months, and in that time the naval attachés of both the British and American embassies have been utterly burnt out. If a Japanese house goes, only one or two of the curios which are in use will be destroyed, the rest are safe in a go-down, but in a foreign house all the curios are about and in use, and a fire sweeps the whole away. How extravagant we foreigners are. December 24th. I went up to the university intending to have a day's quiet work, but at 9:30 Mrs. M., one of the family who gave the gas engine, brought her sons to see the fossils being cut. Not much was done before lunch, when Dr. M. was there. Soon after that the Dean came and made a delightful stay, and we had just finished tea with him when the President, Baron H., came and wanted to see some fossils, so we showed him some of the prettier ones under the microscope. I am glad he came and really saw the things, so that after all the Christmas Eve I had expected to work through became a series of parties all the time, and I enjoyed it more than I had expected to, though I worked less. December 26th. I got to the university at 9:30, though this same morn I crept into bed at 1 a.m. Work did not seem very exciting, but it was soon laid on one side, for the Dean came again. This time in an official capacity, bearing a huge box tied up nicely. This he solemnly opened up, and we found another box inside tied with broad green silk cord, which when opened revealed cotton wool and yellow wrappings, which when removed gave place to squares of heavy, rich, white silk brocade, which were wrapped round the most wonderful blue-grey silver cloisonné vases, not the ordinary, but the special new rare and precious kind made with very few silver wires, so that the colours melt into each other and it looks like Markazoo or Copenhagen porcelain. Far more than half are marred in the manufacture, so that a perfect pair are gems. These two of mine, for now I am the proud owner of them, are as beautiful as can be, on little carved ebony stands. Only far too beautiful for me. They are an official present from the university in recognition of the stimulus I have been to botany in Japan. I went round to call on Baron H., the President, on my way back home, to say my few halting words of thanks. But what can one say on such occasions, when, moreover, the present should come from me, who have accepted their hospitality so long? But they, out of their goodness of heart or courtesy, reverse everything, and profess to be indebted to me. I cannot cope with it at all. December 27th. Time is now so precious, and the college will be shut for the New Year very soon, so I went to the laboratory today and worked till nearly 4 o'clock. A miserable wet day, with the streets ankle deep in slush. The pines and bamboos of the New Year are beginning to appear before the doors, and at the corners are stalls which sell the knotted rope festoons which every house will have over its gate. But the weather has a depressing effect to-day, and lanterns and gay street stalls are few and far between. December 28th. A bright sunny day, but the roads are just unspeakable. My bicycle got quite blocked up a dozen times, so that the space between the mudguard and the tyre was filled tight from top to bottom. Hard at work at the Institute all day, for this is the last day before we are locked out for the New Year's holiday. End of November 27th through December 28th, 1908. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. December 29th, 1908, through January 24th, 1909, of A Journal from Japan by Marie Carmichael Stopes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. December 29th. The Institute was quite locked up today, not even the attendant coming, but as we are so hard pressed, I got permission to go, and the garden porter unlocked the door for me, and let me into the cold, echoing building. I was dripping wet and very cross at coming in the rain. No one who could possibly arrange otherwise would ever go out in the rain in Tokyo. The old man brought me a little fire of charcoal, which started the stove, and then left me all alone in the place, where the only sound was the rain dripping and the scratching of an occasional rat, which made me think robbers had come to the place when the whole responsibility lay on me. After an hour I heard soft, stealthy footsteps, and stood prepared to pounce on the unlawful intruder, when there was a knock at the door, and in walked the Dean. He came nominally about the farewell party the University Union is getting up for me, but I expect it was also semi-official, as to have the place open was rather an anxiety, I fear. His stealthiness was the result of the rain, for he came in rubbers. Later on Professor F came, and we got on well with the work, because there were none of the usual disturbing demands of the other workers in the Institute. On the way home it was forced in upon me that life was not worth living in Tokyo when it rained. December 30th. At work again in the locked Institute, but the sun shone and we were consequently more cheerful. December 31st. As it is the day before the New Year, Professor F is too busy to work, so I brought home my microscope and some fossils to do here, and had a nice quiet day at home. The days before the New Year are the busiest of the whole 365 for every Japanese. In the evening Flora and I went down to the Ginza to see the big matsuri and buy what took our fancy, provided our purses were large enough. This Ginza matsuri is one of the features of Tokyo this time of the year, and is particularly attractive on the last night of the year. The pavements on both sides of the streets are thronged with people, and lined with mats on the curb, covered with curios and oddments and modern articles of all kinds. The pavement spaces are marked off and numbered, and let out by the police long before. As every one must pay all his debts by the end of the year, lots of curios go cheaper then than at any other time, though great bargains are not to be had in Tokyo any more, too many foreigners have visited it. It was entertaining to watch the crowds, and lots of the curios were very nice. Gold screens I should love, but their size would make them terrible to pack for the journey. Fortunately the rain held off tonight, else many a poor person would suffer for his debts. January 1st, 1909. A bright sunny day for the New Year. This year I did not enter at all into the National Customs, but went for a walk with Flora to see her school, the convent of which I think I have spoken before. The new grounds they now have are very extensive and beautiful. How delicious the reality of country one can get in Tokyo. It is possible in their garden to feel miles from any habitation and in the midst of woodland. When we returned, I found I had missed an event, a visit from the Dean in his court uniform, cocked feather hat, gold lace, sword and all. He had much impressed my maid. Alas that I should have missed the great sight of a university professor in the panoply of state. All the higher government officials must go to the palace unless ill, and pay their respects to the Emperor on the morning of the New Year, after which they make a tour of calls on each other. In the evening I dined with the Fs. We were a merry party and danced till late. January 5th. A national holiday, so work was once more impossible. Instead, we went down to see the sea at Enoshima. I had great hopes that the cone of Fuji mountain would show above the coast over the water. It is one of the loveliest views of Fuji, and I have never yet seen it. The day was fine, but not clear enough for that, however. Enoshima Island, reached by the long bridge from the sandy shore, has often been described, so there is no need to reiterate its beauties. It was a solemnly lovely day, not a glowing one, and the line of black foreground on the opposite coast, overtopped by fainter and fainter jagged ridges of hills, had the beauty of an old Japanese master. Alas, that the jewel of it all, Mount Fuji, was not to be seen. In all the 18 months here, I have never yet seen the cone above the coast hills from the sea. which is the most lovely view of all, they say, and this is my last chance. After buying a few strings of shells from the countless stores on the little island, and watching a naked brown man dive into the deep waves and come up with a living fish in his hand, which he presented to me, and doing all the other things essential to be done in Enoshima, we returned to the mainland, and as we had half an hour to wait, I insisted on going up an attractive looking hill. It was a temple hill, with beauty and solitude for its crown, and such a view as I shall never forget of rocky coast and grey villages, of the sea with its jewel islands, and of the wave-like crested hills, a grey and black and purple view, with a dull green foreground and an atmosphere of mystery. Tokyo, most favoured city to have such a coast so very near, what we miss in London. January 6 through 8. Working hard morning, noon and night, with packing of fossils and books and household goods thrown in. January 9. At work all day at the Institute. In the late afternoon a call at the Embassy about the official thanks to the Japanese, then on to Miss C about the next debate, and finally a scamper to dress for dinner at Mrs. W's. When dressed it was too late to do anything but cycle there, but halfway on my road it began to snow. We had a very jolly dinner, and I felt increasingly affectionate towards Tokyo. The people were all so kind. The snow had stopped, so I cycled back, though it lay thick on the ground, and it came on again before I got home. But a chiffon scarf protects one wonderfully from snow, and it was so pretty riding through it, instead of being cooped up in a kuruma, with danger of the men falling and breaking one's neck. Kurumas aren't at all safe in snowy weather, and are bitterly cold. January 10th. The snow must have fallen nearly all the night, for it lay deep this morning. Soon after 10 it became bright and clear, and I set off to see the temples in Shiba Park. Very few people were about, and in the park just a stray poet or two and a photographer. I climbed one of the hills in it, and before me lay the sea, beneath the snow-clad trees and temple roofs. I turned, and scarlet through the festoons of gleaming white glowed the fretwork of a pagoda. Up and down little hills I wandered, the great trees standing free as in a forest, and the ground, as in a forest, trellised with big roots. The snow hid the low bamboos, and gave the whole hilly landscape such a look that one needed no imagination to fancy oneself in a distant mountain forest, till the curved roof and crimson sides of a temple showed between the trees. In absolute solitude I walked, on untrodden snow, with no sight or sound of man. Round me the musical clouds of snow that fell as the wind swayed the boughs of the tall cryptomerias above my head. And this is the heart of a capital city, Tokyo, queen of cities. The long line of stone lanterns, the crimson bridge, the temples and trees, as well as the forest beauty, were rendered indescribably lovely by this snow. A friend was to have come with me to see the temples, and the snow prevented him, poor foolish man, but I am glad I was there alone. January 11th. A brilliant, clear day. I was at work all the morning. In the afternoon was the party at the Nobles Club, given as a farewell for me by the London University Union. Quite a lot of people came, and I was transfixed in the middle of it all by a presentation from Baron K in the name of the Union, of 3 lovely gold lacquer boxes. Gold lacquer? A thing I have longed to possess, and a gift as well as a party from the dear Union, which I never dreamed would notice my departure. It was not a little overwhelming, and I had to make a speech of thanks, and bungled it, of course. Most of the 50 or so people who came to the party were my friends, guests of the Union, and one of them, as she said goodbye, said to me also, "Thank you." I answered, of course, "Oh, you mustn't thank me, I did not give the party." "Well then," she said hurriedly, "thank you for going away." My raised eyebrows and appealing eyes perhaps made her add, as she did going out of the door, "so that we can have a party." She was not a humorist, but one of those dear solemn people who take life seriously. This party and the beautiful gift has touched me deeply. All the members of the Union contributed, English and Japanese alike. January 14th. The last lunch at the Goten I expect, for next week will certainly be busy. These faculty lunches have certainly been very pleasant, and I am sorry they are coming to an end, like many another thing in this country for me. More PPC calls in the afternoon. As I returned in the dark I met more than one man running with tinkling bell, clad in only a white cotton kimono. I have noticed several such quaint folk lately, and Professor F told me that in the coldest season a number of people will do this. It is a kind of remnant of the old hardening processes of Bushido, when children were sent barefoot and hungry across the snow, or sent supperless to bed. None of those I saw running looked very robust, and I wondered whether such spasmodic hardening as a run on a cold winter's night, practically naked, might not defeat its own ends. It looks on the face of it as though daily hardening might be more effective, in which case these same youths could discard the thick woolen mufflers they wear over mouths and ears and noses as they go out in the sunny streets. January 17th. At 1 o'clock I sallied forth with a long calling list. Fortunately, one can call early on Japanese ladies. Baron and Baroness H were both in and very gracious. It is difficult to say goodbye. There were several other short calls, and then my last visit to the S.'s pretty house, from which I saw the beautiful garden for the last time. Afterwards I went to see the grey lady, Mrs. N. 4-year-old Brownie remembered me and welcomed me in, doing the honours of the house and showing me all his toys. The grey lady is revealing herself a little. I am sorry I must go, and so will not see her again. People who really interest one are not too many on this earth. She started life as a scientist, but found chemistry so easy that it was no mental discipline, so she took to history, where dates have no reasons and are therefore hard to remember, but here too she came out top of the classes. She lies behind the poetry of that Japanese poet who wrote in English, and was so praised by Rossetti, the N of American fame, if I am not much mistaken, though she does not tell one so consciously. January 18th. A long day at the Institute working and packing, and then to the M's to dinner. The house is being redone up, and some of the rooms are now very charming. Mr. M, Mrs. M, Mrs. H, and several others were there, and the dinner was pleasant, but afterwards the treat came. When we went into the drawing room, I noticed a tray with lots and lots of white vases and cups and plates, and wondered what they were for. They told us almost at once. They had a great porcelain maker there, and on the stone veranda were set up the furnaces and ovens and attendants, and we were to paint the porcelain, and it would be baked and glazed and finished before our eyes that evening. What it is to be a millionaire, and how much more to be one who could devise such charming pleasures. We all set to work gaily, the sons and little girl came in, and we had a very merry time. The quality of our painting doubtless left something to be desired, but we did not think of that till after, and really some of them were pretty even the next day. The baking was the great excitement. The little furnaces were surrounded by glowing charcoal, fanned by the white-clad potters, till a cloud of sparks rose over the fiery clay. We were half shut in the veranda, but could see between the fires the snowy garden. The heat was so great that we rushed in and out of the drawing room with no thought of cold, and multiplied our pots and vases rapidly. The time flew too swiftly, and I had to leave many still to be baked and to be seen tomorrow. This too was a farewell party for me, and the kindness and grace of my hostess made it a very pleasant one. January 19th. Called at 9:30 at the M's just to see the exhibition of our last night's pottery making, and found a big show, only one piece having been broken in the baking, which seems very good for furnaces erected in a private house. I had to hurry away to the Institute, for every moment is now urgently needed for my scientific work, and fortunately got on pretty well with it today. January 22nd. A busy day. Calls on the way home and a dinner at the P's, where I am now going to stop the 2 nights till I leave, as my house must get packed up and sold up. Professor S came to dinner and the F's. Professor P has only been back a few days from London by Siberia and had home news. After the guests left at 11:30, I went over to my house, took off my evening frock, and prepared for a night's work. There was no help for it. Packing, letters, PPC cards, and 100 things had to be done, and still there was work at the Institute. The night flew by with cocoa and cake at 3:30, and after breakfast I went to the Institute to finish up things there. A few calls had to be paid on the way back. So much kindness from so many friends necessitates calling. After dinner I was approaching insanity over the folly of the men who were padlocking my trunks. January 24th. The peas were very good, and let me wake them up at 6:30. Then there were a few little things to do, a look round mine own little house, all empty and forlorn, and we set off for the station. As I left at 8:20 on Sunday morning, I never expected any one to see me off, except perhaps one or two special friends. But there was quite a big crowd of kindly folk, the M's with lovely flowers from their greenhouse, and all with good wishes. Why I didn't break down and howl on the platform I don't know. Professor S., Professor F., Dr. M., Dr. H., and my maid came to Yokohama to the boat with me, where they cheered me till it started by photographing the party in groups and writing picture postcards and walking round the deck with me one at a time in friendly converse. Then, just before we sailed, I saw a gleam of what looked like Fujii Mountain. Was she going to forget her cruelty and coyness and show herself to me over the water at last, at the latest possible moment? But the clouds closed again, the tender took my last friends from me, the ladder was up, and we steamed away as the bell sounded for lunch. Then after it I went on deck, and before me lay a wonderful panorama, near rocky coast, pine crested, then beyond a dark line of more distant woods and bays, and in the midst perfect, peerless cloudness, the cone of the snow-white Fujii Mountain. I gazed and gazed for an hour at the changing view of ever-lovely coast and ever-lovely mountain. Round the mountain top light clouds collected and dispersed like flying veils. One rose from the crater and dissolved like a puff of smoke, some circled the base and shut off the crown from the black fringing trees below. So, as I left Japan, her greatest beauty showed herself to me. End of December 29th, 1908 through January 24th, 1909. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Conclusion of A Journal from Japan by Marie Carmichael Stopes. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Conclusion. Innumerable times have I made believe to answer the question, "How do you like the Japanese?" or the even more impossible one, "What do you think of the Japanese?" Questions generally put up by new acquaintances directly after introduction, in crowded drawing rooms, where we were liable to be torn apart at any moment, and the qualifying clauses which would have followed a preliminary statement to be separated eternally from their principles, which cut but a poor figure without them. I soon found that in common justice I must avoid answering that query. Yet now, at the conclusion of this journal, when there is no escape, the question presents itself once more. A complete answer even here is impossible. Those who have read the foregoing pages will have already the key to much of the answer, but often they were smaller and more subtle things than could be recorded in this journal that built up the real impressions of the country. Judging from the books on this subject, and the questions which I have been asked since my return, it seems fairly safe to say that nearly everything which is commonly held in England to be Japanese and typical of that country is not so. The number of horrible export articles which have been shown to me as real Japanese, or are said to have been brought back from Japan by some relative who had visited it, show that there is not a very wide knowledge of the true domestic culture of that country here. There is a phrase which seems to hover over every conversation on Japan, which should be included in the book of bromidioms. It is, of course, everything in Japan is so artistic. It sometimes appears in the alternative form, the Japanese are a nation of artists. As a result, everything which is guaranteed as coming from Japan is accepted as artistic by most people, and one finds otherwise cultured ladies serving their tea in the most unutterable crockery, which was made in Japan according to the Japanese merchant's idea of what European (barbaric) taste must be, in defiance of every law of beauty both in Japan and here. The Japanese are no longer a nation of artists. They cannot afford to be. In the security of their long peace, and when they were shut out from competition with the rest of the world, they evolved for every detail of daily life, and not only for their churches and palaces, formulae by which every workman could construct intrinsically beautiful things. These formulae, where they are undisturbed today, still make of the common workman an artist, in so far that he creates a beautiful thing, even if it be only a farthing piece of pottery. But alas, Western influence has in many places disturbed or broken these old traditions, and the craftsman is then like a mariner at sea without a compass. Apart from their own traditions, there is in the great majority of Japanese practically no artistic instinct. As a wise Japanese man once said to me, after deploring the lack of artistic feeling in his countrymen, perhaps it will reappear in another generation. The present one has had to use all its energies and thought for national defense. Commerce, diplomacy, education, scientific research, all, as well as war, he included in national defense. In these years of stress, art, being of little account in the Western civilization which they were trying to assimilate, had to stand aside. Where the progress in a new direction has not disturbed her courts, she is still served as she was served before the revolution, often best in the simple things of life, which in England have not yet been reached by an all-pervading genius, such as penetrated everywhere in the Japan of long ago. Another of the myths common in this country about Japan is that her people are all brilliantly, almost diabolically clever. This, I think, is very far from being even a semblance of the truth. With very few exceptions, individual men and women among the Japanese are capable of very much less mental activity in a day than a corresponding English man or woman. An educated Englishman has his hobby, often more or less intellectual, to come to when the day's work is done. He reads, as a matter of course, a number of books and reviews on all sorts of subjects, and he spends a good many hours per week in social life of various kinds. Because he goes to the theatre one evening, or takes his wife to a concert, it does not mean that he requires to come 2 hours late to work the following day, or that he thinks it an excuse for absenting himself all morning from business. A dinner with a dozen friends in the evening may often precede several hours' writing late at night in the life of an English professor. But the average Japanese intellectual man could not do this at all, or could not do it often. An individual Japanese may make as good a show in his profession as the Englishman, but he is generally economizing every possible expenditure of brain force outside this profession, and will enjoy less social life in a month than the average working, not social, Englishman indulges in a week. It seemed to me to be characteristic of the average Japanese to be only able to hold the reins of one set of thoughts at once. I shall never forget the astonishment with which I listened to a professor who explained that the reason that he came 2 hours after the time he should have given his university lecture was that his child had been naughty that morning and required correction, and that it took thought and time to accomplish it. It is difficult to give concrete examples, but on many occasions I have watched one thought ousting another in a Japanese mind, which in an Englishman's would have developed together. This gives an impression of what often appears very like stupidity in a Japanese, outside the range of the one thing that he has in hand, and sometimes even within it. But this does not affect the general position of the nation as a whole when it sets itself to any task, let us say the conquering of the Russians in a war. In government departments, each man has his special duty, and can concentrate entirely on that. The man above him has to correlate that with the rest, and so on to the top of the service, where the places are generally filled, certainly in the university, a government department, by brilliant men, who have what I feel inclined to call the English capacity for controlling a number of things at once. Most of the men at the top have been in the West, and even without that additional training, they form exceptions to the rule which the others seem to exemplify. The nation as a whole, then, composed of individuals who are rather stupid, led by brilliant men, and worked with a splendid system of organization, assisted by the old feudal spirit not yet dead, presents to the world as good or better a front than one in which the individuals are each more independently developed. Even in merely manual labour, the Japanese in Japan do not seem to do so much as workmen do at home. A Japanese coal mine has in its pay nearly one half as many workers again as an English mine with the same output. The climate has much to do with this and the national customs. The climate, although beautiful and sunny nearly all the year round, has a subtle lethargic effect, so that even the Englishman in Japan does less than he could do in England. Generations of this insidious influence have undoubtedly affected the Japanese. The children playing so quietly with none of the obstreperousness of vigorous youth are an index of its power. A question that few of my drawing room acquaintances spare me is one on the religious condition of the Japanese. This is generally so worded that it is clear that the interrogator is already certain that they are devoid of religious feeling, but that he trusts the West is doing something for the stimulation of their souls. Again, I must disagree with the popular impression in this country. There is no land in which I have been where there seemed to be a more universal religious feeling, none in which the religion formed more an integral part of daily life. The religious temperament is strongly developed in the majority of Japanese, but the religious temperament is not to be confounded with any particular religion. It is indeed often most strongly developed in those who appear to have no religion, perhaps because the very strength of their religious instincts debars them from being satisfied with the formulated religion of their time. In little educated people, too, that instinct often finds expression in superstitions, or in the popular forms of religions which have a pantheon of gods or saints. Thus is it in Japan. Their feeling for religion is gratified constantly throughout every day, not kept apart for the Sabbath as it is here. It is true that the religious ideas of the mass of the people are neither very clear nor very high, but they are a very real part of their daily life. In the country in England one may go many miles without seeing a church, and we do not have wayside shrines, but in Japan there is some shrine or temple at every turn, in nearly every house, even in most hotels. And these shrines are not deserted, they are tended daily by the passers-by, as well as by the dwellers in the immediate neighbourhood. In the main streets of Tokyo, the streets where the West has penetrated, even there I have seen little shrines, perhaps like dolls' houses, only a couple of feet high, reverently tended by passing labourers, or coolies who set down a long pole with its swinging burdens to present some little offering to the spirit of the shrine. It may be that all they have to offer are the worn sandals which they take off their feet, or a wisp of straw. It is curious to notice how largely straw enters into the place of religious offerings. Straw ropes hang before the temple gates, or single straws depending from a line make a decorative fringe. Old straw sandals or new and monstrous sandals, specially made for the purpose, are offered in piles to a small shrine. This offering of straw is symbolic in a land where so many things are made of it. The matting and nearly all the comforts of the house are made of straw, the sandals and raincoats, the labourers' hats, in the very poor places even the walls as well as the thatch of his house are all made from straw. Those who are too poor to give the ears of the rice except on special occasions can yet afford a wisp of rice straw for many a shrine, and rice is naturally symbolic of all their material welfare. It is not only in the peasant that this close daily touch of religion may be found. Driven back to the secret places of the house, and not spoken of to foreigners, is yet the shrine, kept with its daily ministration, in homes where one would least expect to find it. I asked an atheist scientific professor once what he would do if the woman whom he loved should die. He told me that he would engrave her name on the tablet in his shrine, before which was a prayer made every day. The religious instinct is a far greater thing than any formulated religion, and though missionaries may continue to tell the world that the Japanese are naturally irreligious, that will not prevent the Japanese from being deeply religious, until they have assimilated the Western attitude to religion as they are doing toward other things. Perhaps one reason that the missionary finds the Japanese irreligious is that they take religion so happily, and make of it so much a part of their daily life, laughing in the temples, playing round the temple grounds, lighting the light of their little shrines in their homes when their household lamps are lit. One of the commonest sights in Japan is a band of peasant pilgrims on their way to some shrine, and it is the ambition of innumerable poor folk, who could never afford ordinary travel and holidays, to visit every temple of importance in the country. How many English common folk, since the days of the Canterbury Pilgrims, would travel on foot for 100 miles to lay a wisp of straw on a shrine? Because the Japanese are not, and I think never will be in our sense of the word, Christians, there is no excuse for our concluding that they are not religious. Only of one thing more will I now speak. Sometimes carelessly, sometimes sadly, it has often been said that there can be no true understanding, no deep friendship between the East and the West. Even Lafcadio Hearn is quoted as an instance of the disappointment that must await the foreigner who tries to get to the heart of a Japanese. And Lafcadio Hearn, as is now being recognized, has shown us more truly and more beautifully than any other writer the inner life of Japan. He tells us, it is true, that in the end he found that it was only with the children that we could reach a real and close understanding and love, that as they grew up to men and women, they receded farther and farther from one, till a great wall was built between them, and the lovable and loving child had become a friend who had lost the key of sympathy. This is perhaps true in most cases, but we must not forget that with his genius for suggestive and true description, and for poetical rendering of the things around him, Hearn seems to have had also a perfect genius for destroying individual friendships. Evidence of this is found cropping up in many places in Japan, where he shattered his friendships with English and Japanese alike, and it is already made clear in his letters. One of the tests of friendship is time, and only at the end of a lifetime can one say just which men and women had been one's real friends. But circumstance is almost as good a test as time, and that may give its stamp to a relationship very swiftly. Some Japanese, perhaps, nay certainly, they are exceptional natures, have a genius for friendship. There is in them a sweetness and delicacy, a sensitive comprehension of moods, a depth of feeling and a beauty of feeling which only the exceptional Westerner could match. The almost inhuman coldness which is so often attributed to the Japanese is not at all truly characteristic of them. Their reserve appears to us to be reserve only because we do not know how to read the signs of their expression, and because many careless Europeans before us may have trampled on holy ground. The apparently immobile face is immobile only because we ourselves are not alive to its subtle changes. When you know a Japanese face, it is as eloquent as that of a sensitive English girl, and the moods and feelings it mirrors are not alien to ours. Some of the thoughts and some of the conclusions from the same premises may be different from ours, but they are not the essentials in friendship. The coldness and the insincerity of the Japanese are qualities which we have largely invented for them to save the trouble of learning their truths, and of cultivating the power to read their subtle expressions. Nor are they always difficult to read if we have the privilege of friendship. In the changeless eyes of the Japanese I have seen fire and mist, radiance and storm. I have seen men's tears welling up from the sweetness beneath to veil the eyes that looked on sorrowful things, or things so beautiful as to be a pain, as is Mount Fuji in an opal morning. In the hearts of some Japanese I have found friendship, tested by circumstance, true and generous and sweet. Those from the West who cannot find it also need not lay all the blame on the Japanese. End of conclusion. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. End of a Journal from Japan by Marie Carmichael Stopes.